The words, "You people always think you know better than real cops," slice through the air of Department 8 in Metro City, Superior Court like a blade, sharp enough to silence even the rustle of papers. Sergeant Brock Halsey stands in the witness box, his face crimson, jaw clenched so tight the tendons in his neck stand out like steel cables. His finger jabs toward the defense table where Adira Stone sits spine straight, hands folded over a manila folder that contains everything he wishes would disappear forever. The gallery holds its breath. Someone's phone buzzes, a violation of courtroom protocol, but nobody moves to silence it. Judge Helena Garrett's gavel hovers midair, frozen in the moment before impact, as if even the court itself recognizes something irreversible is about to happen. Adira's voice cuts through the tension, level and precise. "Your Honor, I'd like to remind the witness that under oath, his personal feelings about opposing counsel are irrelevant to the facts of this case." Brock's hands grip the witness box rail. The wood creaks. "Facts? You want facts? How about the fact that you're a—" The slap comes fast. His palm connects with her cheek before the bailiff can move, before the gasps from the gallery can form into screams, before Judge Garrett's gavel finally crashes down. The sound echoes like a gunshot in the marble chamber. Adira's head snaps sideways. She tastes copper, bit her inner cheek on impact. Heat spreads across her face in a starburst pattern, the kind of sting that makes eyes water involuntarily. She doesn't stumble, doesn't cry out. Her hand rises slowly to touch her cheek, fingers exploring the heat blooming under her skin. Around her, the courtroom erupts into chaos, shouting, chairs scraping, someone screaming, "Oh my God!" But all of it sounds distant, muffled, as though she's underwater. Brock lunges forward, his bulk clearing the witness box in a movement clumsy with rage. "You think you're better than—" Her body responds before conscious thought forms. Weight shifts to the balls of her feet. Hands rise not in defensive cowering, but in precise positioning. She steps inside his reach as he swings again, catches his extended wrist with her left hand, his elbow with her right. Hip rotation, pull down and forward. His momentum does the rest. The throw is textbook. Ippon Soe Nage, one-arm shoulder throw, executed with a kind of precision that only comes from thousands of repetitions. Brock flips over her shoulder, his 220 pounds of muscle and fury suddenly weightless, and crashes into the defense table. Papers explode into the air like startled birds. A water pitcher shatters against the floor. The sound of his body hitting wood reverberates through the chamber. Silence descends, sharp and absolute. Then phones emerge from pockets and purses throughout the gallery. A forest of recording devices with little red lights winking like malevolent eyes. But they're about to discover something unbelievable about this woman they all thought they knew. 72 hours earlier, Adira Stone's office in downtown Metro City smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. The combination that had defined her life since she'd hung her shingle as a civil rights attorney 3 years ago. Sunlight slanted through Venetian blinds, striping the case files stacked in precise rows across her desk. Criminal defense attorneys rarely got corners with views, but Adira had learned to appreciate small mercies. The window faced east, giving her morning light, and the building's ancient radiator actually worked in winter. She reviewed documents spread before her, fingers tracing the timeline she'd constructed from witness statements, police reports, and surveillance footage. Timestamps, case numbers, chain of custody documentation, organized with a precision that spoke of training most lawyers never received. Case number CV20-24-8934. Carmen Rivera versus the City of Metro City and Metro City Police Department. The family's matriarch, a hotel housekeeper who'd raised 4 children on minimum wage, was suing over her son's death in police custody. 17-year-old Miguel Rivera had died during what MCPD called routine processing, following a minor drug arrest. The cause of death remained officially undetermined, pending investigation. The investigating officers claimed Miguel had become agitated during booking, requiring restraint. The autopsy showed broken ribs, bruised organs, and clear signs of positional asphyxia, death caused by being unable to breathe due to body position. But the official report described a sudden medical emergency, unrelated to police actions. Adira's desk drawer held something she'd kept for 6 years, a small item she touched unconsciously whenever cases like this crossed her desk. Not today, though. Today she kept her hands on the evidence, the facts, the trail of contradictions that suggested Miguel Rivera's death was anything but natural. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "You don't know what you're digging into. Walk away while you can." She screenshot the message, saved it to her evidence folder, and continued working. Anonymous threats were part of the job when you fought City Hall, when you fought the people who wore badges. Footsteps in the hallway announced her partner's arrival. Olivia Sterling appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She was Stanford Law, born for corporate litigation, but something about police accountability cases had drawn her to Adira's small practice. More importantly, she'd never once asked why Adira had left whatever career she'd had before law school. Some silences were worth preserving. Rivera family's coming in at 2, Olivia said, setting 1 cup on the desk. Carmen wants to go over the timeline again. Adira nodded, pulling out photographs organized by timestamp. The habit of chronological organization was automatic, muscle memory from another life. Most defense attorneys didn't bother with such precision, but Adira cross-referenced every witness statement against building entry logs, security camera footage, and dispatch call records. The devil lived in details, in the 3-minute gap between when officers claimed they'd begun restraining Miguel and when the emergency medical call was placed. At 3 that afternoon, she met Carmen Rivera at the coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. The location was strategic. Good light for reviewing documents, multiple exits, clear sightlines to the street. Habits died hard. Carmen was 53 with hands scarred from decades of cleaning other people's homes. Her English was careful, precise, weighted with the knowledge that every word mattered when fighting City Hall. Her daughter Maria sat beside her, arm still in a sling from where she'd been restrained when she tried to reach her brother during the arrest. At a neighboring table, 2 men in casual clothes, off-duty cops, obvious from their posture and the way they positioned themselves facing the door, spoke just loud enough to be overheard. That's the lawyer defending the Rivera case. The first one, stocky with a shaved head, didn't bother lowering his voice. Used to be one of us till she went rogue. His companion, thinner with a pencil mustache, laughed. Traitor. Taking drug dealer money now. Carmen's hand trembled on her coffee cup, the liquid inside creating tiny ripples. Maria's jaw clenched, but Adira reached across the table and squeezed Carmen's wrist once, gently. Ignore them. We have work to do. She pulled out the incident report, pointing to discrepancies she'd marked in red ink. Here, Officer Halsey's report states Miguel became combative at 9:47 p.m., requiring immediate restraint. But the computer-aided dispatch printout shows emergency medical wasn't called until 9:59. 12 minutes. What does that mean? Carmen's English was good, but legal terminology still created barriers. It means they restrained your son for 12 minutes before calling for medical help. And during those 12 minutes, according to their own reports, Miguel was face down, with multiple officers applying pressure to his back and neck. That's called positional asphyxia. It's a known cause of death, and they should have recognized the signs. Maria leaned forward. Will the jury understand that? They will when I'm done explaining it. Adira kept her voice confident, though juries in police misconduct cases were notoriously reluctant to side against officers. She'd need more than legal technicalities. She'd need to make them see what really happened that night. And she had resources most civil rights lawyers didn't possess. If you're already shocked by what you just saw, hit that like button, because this is just the beginning. The identity she's hiding will blow your mind. Don't forget to subscribe if you love stories where justice actually wins. The courthouse security checkpoint Monday morning moved with the efficiency of molasses in January. David Hayes worked the main entrance, a 20-year veteran who'd outlasted 4 chiefs and countless reforms. He was the kind of bailiff who knew everyone's business, spread it like fertilizer, and enjoyed watching things grow into conflicts. Adira placed her briefcase and phone in the plastic bin, then stepped through the metal detector. Clean. She reached for her belongings, but David held her identification card just out of reach, studying it with theatrical slowness. Oh, sorry, Miss Stone. His smile showed too many teeth. Or is it still Agent Stone? I forget. The other bailiffs at the checkpoint snickered. Morning light streamed through the courthouse's tall windows, illuminating dust motes and the faces of people waiting in line behind Adira, all of them now watching this small power play. It's Attorney Stone. She kept her voice neutral, professional. And I need my identification to enter. David examined the card as though he'd never seen a state bar license before. Right, attorney. Funny how that works. Used to enforce the law, now you're fighting against it. He held the card between 2 fingers, dangling it just beyond her reach. 3 seconds passed, marked by the wall clock's steady tick, before he finally released it. Here you go, ma'am. Adira took the card without comment and continued to the elevator bank. But she made a mental note of the interaction, filed it away with the other small indignities that accumulated like interest on a debt nobody wanted to acknowledge. The 3rd-floor hallway buzzed with pretrial activity. Attorneys negotiated last-minute plea deals. Families clustered on benches outside courtrooms. The perpetual smell of floor wax and stale coffee, Assistant District Attorney Laura Davies materialized from the crowd like a shark emerging from murky water. She was everything Adira wasn't. Pedigreed University of Virginia law degree prominently displayed in her office. Never lost a police misconduct case in 7 years. She possessed the kind of confidence that came from knowing the system bent toward her by default. Counselor? Laura's smile was professional, polite, and utterly devoid of warmth. I've reviewed your witness list. I'm filing a motion to exclude Dr. Patterson's testimony. His use of force analysis exceeds the scope of expert witness standards under Evidence Code 720. Adira had expected this. Patterson was her ace, a former MCPD training instructor turned expert witness who could explain to juries exactly how and why certain restraint techniques violated department policy. His credentials are impeccable. 20 years training officers in de-escalation. Then you'll have no trouble defending the Daubert challenge at tomorrow's hearing. Laura's heels clicked away down the corridor, each step precise as a metronome, leaving Adira standing in the artificial light with the sinking feeling that this case was going to be harder than anticipated. That evening, the parking garage's third level smelled like oil and old exhaust. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting stuttering shadows across the concrete. Adira's 10-year-old Civic waited where she'd left it that morning, except something was wrong. The car sat lower than normal, listing to one side. She approached slowly, phone already out and camera activated. All 4 tires had been slashed, clean cuts that suggested a knife rather than random vandalism. Spray paint decorated the hood in angry red letters. Traitor. Her hand stayed steady as she photographed the damage from 6 angles, documenting the cuts, the paint, the security camera mounted in the corner with its red indicator light conspicuously dark. She opened her phone's notes app, tagged the photos with the parking level, timestamp, and camera position. The detail work was automatic, muscle memory from another life. Nobody else occupied this level. The elevator dinged somewhere distant. Adira stood in the pool of flickering light, looking at the words someone had painted across her car, and felt the familiar weight of isolation settle on her shoulders. This was what happened when you broke ranks. This was the price. She called a rideshare and went home, but sleep didn't come easily. Her apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in with the weight of what she was about to do. Walk into a courtroom and call out officers she'd once worked alongside, knowing they'd see it as betrayal rather than accountability. Don't face corrupt systems alone like our undercover agent had to. NordVPN provides military-grade encryption to protect your communications when fighting injustice. Keep your identity secure, your data private, and your investigations protected. Get NordVPN now at nordvpn.com/justice. 68% off plus 3 months free for new subscribers. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and the kind of heat that made Metro City feel like an oven preheating. Department 8 seated 100 people comfortably, and today every seat was full. Half the gallery wore blue, off-duty officers, police union representatives, Brock's supporters. The other half wore the Rivera family's colors, a sea of morning black mixed with defiant red, the community that had watched too many of their own disappear into the system. Judge Helena Garrett presided, a woman in her late 50s with iron gray hair and a reputation for running her courtroom with military precision. She'd been on the bench for 15 years and had seen every trick in the book. Her expression suggested she expected to see several more before the day ended. Brock Halsey entered wearing his full-dress uniform, navy blue with silver badges, ribbons marking commendations earned over 20 years of service. The uniform was technically inappropriate. Witnesses were supposed to appear in civilian clothes to avoid prejudicing the jury. But it was a power move, a statement. I am the law. Adira rose. Your Honor, I move that the witness change into civilian attire. His uniform is prejudicial to the jury and suggests an authority he doesn't possess in this context. Laura Davies stood smoothly, her response prepared. The witness is a decorated sergeant with an exemplary service record. His uniform reflects his dedication to public safety and is relevant to his credibility. Judge Garrett considered, her eyes moving between Adira and Brock. The calculation was visible. Ruling for Adira would alienate every police officer in the gallery, but ruling for Laura would tacitly endorse the intimidation tactic. Objection overruled. Continue, Miss Stone. The jury filed in, 12 faces representing a cross-section of Metro County, though Adira noted that voir dire had somehow eliminated every potential juror who'd expressed strong opinions about police accountability. Funny how that worked. Brock settled into the witness box with the ease of someone who'd testified hundreds of times. He understood the performance aspect, how to angle his body toward the jury, how to make eye contact without seeming aggressive. Laura walked him through his background. 22 years on the force, commendations for bravery. Dear bravery, training in crisis intervention and de-escalation. By the time she finished direct examination, Brock looked like a candidate for sainthood. Adira stood for cross-examination, gathering her notes with deliberate care. The courtroom quieted. That particular hush that precedes confrontation. Good morning, Sergeant Halsey. Her voice carried easily in the marble chamber. You responded to a drug arrest call at 1247 Maple Street on March 14, 2023. Is that correct? Brock's jaw set slightly, but his voice remained professional. That's correct. Your incident report states Miguel Rivera became combative during booking at 9:47 p.m. She held up the document, letting the jury see the timestamp. Can you confirm that's what you wrote? Yes. And emergency medical services were called at 9:59 p.m., according to dispatch logs. That's 12 minutes later. Can you explain what happened during those 12 minutes? The suspect continued to resist. We used approved restraint techniques to maintain control. Approved by whom? Brock hesitated. Department policy. Can you cite the specific departmental policy that approves placing a suspect face down with multiple officers applying pressure to his back and neck for 12 consecutive minutes? Laura shot to her feet. Objection. Calls for a legal conclusion. Sustained. Adira approached the witness box. Sergeant, during your 22 years of service, how many deaths in custody have you witnessed? I don't keep count of. More than 5? Objection. Relevance. Goes to the witness's experience and training, Your Honor. Overruled. Answer the question, Sergeant. Brock's face had gone from its normal tan to an unhealthy red. Maybe. I don't remember exactly. In any of those cases, did you receive training on positional asphyxia? Some. And what does that training teach about face-down restraints? That they can be dangerous if prolonged. How long is too long? It depends on the circumstances. Adira pulled out another document. According to your training records obtained through discovery, you completed a course on positional asphyxia just 6 months before Miguel Rivera's death. The manual states that face-down restraints should be discontinued immediately once the subject is secured, and in no case should exceed 3 minutes. Do you recall reading that? Brock's knuckles went white on the rail. I recall general guidelines. Guidelines that you ignored for 12 minutes while Miguel Rivera died? Objection. Sustained. The jury will disregard. But the damage was done. The jury had heard the timeline, seen the contradiction between policy and practice. They'd watched a 22-year veteran struggle to explain why approved procedures weren't followed. Adira returned to this defense table, her movement precise and controlled. She'd established reasonable doubt about the official narrative, planted seeds that would grow during deliberation. But Brock wasn't finished. You know, he said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom, it's real easy to judge from the outside. Real easy to second-guess split-second decisions when you've never worn the badge. Judge Garrett's gavel cracked. Sergeant Halsey, you will only speak when asked a question. But maybe, Brock continued, his control finally slipping, if she'd stuck around instead of running when things got tough, she'd understand what real police work looks like. The courtroom erupted. Reporters leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Carmen Rivera gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Judge Garrett pounded her gavel repeatedly. That's enough. Sergeant Halsey, you are in contempt of this court. But Brock was beyond hearing. He stood in the witness box pointing at Adira with a shaking finger. You want to know the truth about Miguel Rivera? Ask her why she really left the department. Ask her about the Kaminsky case. The silence that followed was deafening. Drop a comment below if you think you've figured out her secret. I bet you're wrong. Stories like this remind us why we fight corruption. Subscribe to never miss these incredible real-life justice moments. The recess was chaos barely contained. Reporters clustered in the hallway, phones pressed to ears as they filed initial stories. The gallery had emptied in a rush of speculation and argument. Judge Garrett had ordered both attorneys to her chambers for an emergency sidebar, leaving the principals to navigate the aftermath. Carmen Rivera approached the defense table with tears streaming down her face. What did he mean? What's the Kaminsky case? Adira gathered her files with steady hands, though her pulse hammered against her throat. It's nothing that affects your case, Mrs. Rivera. Sergeant Halsey is trying to distract from the evidence. But Olivia's expression said she understood the implications. Whatever Brock had referenced, it went to the heart of why Adira had left law enforcement and why these officers treated her like a pariah. In Judge Garrett's chambers, the tension was thick enough to cut. Laura Davies paced behind her chair while Adira sat perfectly still, hands folded. This is a disaster, Laura said. The witness's outburst has irreparably tainted the proceedings. I move for mistrial. Your witness, your problem, Yinyana, Adira replied calmly. The jury heard him lose control under legitimate questioning about departmental policy. Judge Garrett leaned back in her chair. Miss Stone, I'm going to ask you directly. Is there any prior relationship between you and Sergeant Halsey that should have been disclosed? We worked the same shifts for approximately 2 years, 2017 through 2019. It was disclosed in my conflict check when I took this case, but not to opposing counsel or the court until now. Adira met the judge's eyes steadily. I saw no reason to publicize my employment history. It has no bearing on the facts of Miguel Rivera's death. The judge studied her for a long moment. We'll resume tomorrow morning. Miss Davies, control your witness or I'll find him in contempt again. Miss Stone, I strongly advise you to consider whether there are any other surprises that might emerge. That afternoon, Adira worked alone in her office, reviewing witness statements and preparing for the next day's proceedings. The building was quiet except for the hum of the HVAC system and the distant sound of traffic. She was deep in case law when footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her door. A knock, firm, confident. Police knock. Come in. Detective Quinn Fairmont entered, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. She'd aged in the 6 years since Adira had last seen her, lines around her eyes, gray threading through her dark hair. But she still moved with the same predatory grace that had made her a legend in interrogation rooms. Hello, Adira. Detective. Quinn settled into the chair across from Adira's desk without invitation. Thought we should talk before this gets any uglier. I'm representing a client. There's nothing to discuss. Isn't there? Quinn's smile held no warmth. Brock's not exactly known for his discretion. Give him another day on the stand and he'll tell the jury everything about 2019. The year Adira had left the force. The year everything had fallen apart. I'm not afraid of the truth. Really? Quinn leaned forward. Because from where I sit, you've built a nice little life as a civil rights attorney, helping families like the Riveras, making a difference, or at least telling yourself you are. Be a shame if that all came crashing down because you decided to relitigate old history. Miguel Rivera died in police custody. That's not old history, it's current reality. Miguel Rivera was a drug dealer who resisted arrest and had a medical emergency during processing. Sometimes people die in custody. It's tragic, but it's not murder. Adira's voice remained level, but her hands tightened slightly on her pen. The evidence says otherwise. Evidence can be interpreted many ways. Witness testimony can be unreliable. Security footage sometimes malfunctions at crucial moments. Quinn stood, smoothing her jacket. Think about what you're really fighting for here, Adira. Think about what you're willing to lose. After Quinn left, Adira sat in the gathering darkness of her office, city lights beginning to twinkle beyond her windows. She opened the locked drawer of her desk and withdrew a small item, a federal ID card, expired but still valid in some contexts. Special Agent Adira Stone, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She'd kept it as a reminder of the cost of speaking truth to power. Financial independence gives you the power to fight corruption without fear of retaliation. Acorns helps you build wealth automatically, investing your spare change while you focus on justice. Start building your Fight Back Fund today, because financial security equals freedom to stand up for what's right. Sign up at acorns.com/freedom. The second day of trial brought new complications. Adira arrived at the courthouse to find protesters gathered on the front steps, police union supporters holding signs reading "Back the Blue" and "Stop the War on Cops." Counter-protesters from the community held pictures of Miguel Rivera and other young men who died in police custody. Media vans lined the street, satellite dishes reaching toward an overcast sky. The story had gone national overnight. Former cop-turned-lawyer confronts police brutality. The headlines painted her as either a hero or a traitor, depending on the publication's perspective. Inside the courthouse, security was heightened. Additional bailiffs manned the entrances, metal detectors operated at maximum sensitivity, and the gallery had been reorganized to separate opposing factions. Carmen Rivera sat in the front row, flanked by community leaders and civil rights activists. Her face showed the strain of being thrust into the spotlight, but her posture remained straight, dignified. 3 rows back, Chief Marshal Vaughn occupied a seat that gave him clear sightlines to both the defense table and the witness stand. His presence was intended as intimidation, the department's highest-ranking officer monitoring proceedings, ready to respond to any threats against his people. Judge Garrett called the court to order with unusual formality. Before we continue, I want to remind everyone present that this is a court of law, not a public forum. Any disruptions will result in immediate removal and potential contempt charges. Laura Davies rose for redirect examination of Sergeant Halsey. Her strategy was clear: rehabilitate her witness, shore up the official narrative, and neutralize whatever damage had been done during cross-examination. Sergeant, you've served with distinction for 22 years. In your professional opinion, were the restraint techniques used on Miguel Rivera appropriate given the circumstances? Absolutely. Mr. Rivera was actively resisting, posed a danger to himself and others. We used the minimum force necessary to maintain control. And the timing of the medical emergency call? We called as soon as we recognized Mr. Rivera was in distress. Sometimes these situations develop rapidly. Laura paused at the prosecution table, consulting her notes. When she looked up, her expression had hardened. Sergeant, yesterday the defense suggested you were somehow negligent in your duties. Let me ask you this. In your experience, what happens when officers are afraid to do their jobs because of Monday morning quarterbacking from people who've never faced real danger? Adira started to object, but Brock was already answering. Crime goes up, communities suffer. Good officers leave the force because they know they'll be thrown under the bus by politicians and activists who care more about headlines than public safety. No further questions. Judge Garrett nodded toward the defense table. Miss Stone, recross? Adira approached the witness stand with a single document in her hand. The courtroom fell silent, every eye tracking her movement. Sergeant Halsey, you mentioned politicians and activists. Are you including federal law enforcement in that category? Laura shot to her feet. Objection, relevance. I'll allow it. Brock's confident facade flickered. I don't understand the question. Let me be more specific. Would you consider an FBI investigation into police practices to be political activism? That would depend on the circumstances. Adira handed him the document. This is a letter from the FBI Civil Rights Division to Metro City Police Department, dated 6 months ago. Have you seen it before? Brock's face went pale as he scanned the letterhead. I may have seen something similar. It announces the opening of a pattern or practice investigation into MCPD's use of force policies and officer accountability measures. Were you aware that Miguel Rivera's death is part of that federal investigation? The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically while photographers captured Brock's stricken expression. Chief Vaughn's face remained impassive, but his hands clenched into fists. I wasn't aware of the specifics. The letter also mentions cooperation from embedded federal assets who documented systemic violations over a multi-year period. Do you know what embedded federal assets are, Sergeant? Laura was on her feet again. Objection. This line of questioning is beyond the scope. Overruled. Adira stepped closer to the witness box. Embedded assets are federal agents who work undercover within target organizations to gather evidence of criminal activity. Were you aware that such agents had been placed within MCPD? Brock's voice came out as a croak. No. So when you worked patrol shifts from 2017 through 2019, you had no idea that one of your colleagues might have been a federal agent documenting civil rights violations. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Every person in the courtroom understood the implication even if they couldn't quite process its magnitude. No, Brock whispered. Thank you, Sergeant. No further questions. But as Adira returned to her seat, she noticed something that chilled her blood. Chief Vaughn was no longer looking at the witness stand. His eyes were fixed on her with the kind of recognition that came from long-buried memories suddenly surfacing. He knew. Somehow, after 6 years of carefully constructed cover, Chief Marshal Vaughn had figured out who she really was. The lunch recess brought no relief. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Attorneys huddled in urgent conferences, and law enforcement officials made increasingly frantic phone calls to superiors who were just learning their department was under federal investigation. Adira retreated to a small conference room typically used for attorney-client meetings. She needed 15 minutes to process what had just happened and plan her next moves. The revelation about federal investigation was supposed to come later, during her case in chief. Events were accelerating beyond her control. Her secure phone buzzed. Text from a number she recognized. Coffee shop on 5th Street. Now. Agent Sarah Cross sat in the back corner, positioned to watch both entrances while maintaining visual contact with the street. She'd changed since their last meeting. Shorter hair, different style of clothing, the kind of subtle alterations that suggested active operational security. That was quite a performance in there, Sarah said as Adira approached. It wasn't planned. Things escalated. They always do with you. Sarah's smile held genuine affection mixed with professional concern. Sit. We need to talk. Adira chose the chair facing the wall, letting Sarah maintain overwatch. Old habits. The civil rights investigation is real, Sarah confirmed quietly. Has been for 18 months. Your work provided the foundation, but we've expanded it significantly since you left. How many people know about my involvement? Officially? Less than 10? Unofficially? Sarah shrugged. Vaughn just figured it out, obviously. Probably others in MCPD leadership. The question is whether they'll act on that knowledge. Meaning? meaning a former federal agent in witness protection doesn't usually represent clients against her former targets. It raises questions about operational security, ongoing investigations, and whether certain people might feel threatened enough to do something stupid. The coffee shop's ambient noise provided perfect cover for their conversation, but Adira found herself automatically scanning for surveillance, checking reflections in windows, cataloging potential threats. You could take the agent out of the bureau, but some instincts never faded. The Rivera case is legitimate, Adira said. Miguel's death has nothing to do with the federal investigation, doesn't it? He was killed by officers who are now under federal scrutiny. Officers who worked with you during your undercover assignment. Officers who might have suspected your true identity and decided to send a message. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. If Miguel Rivera had died not because of routine police brutality, but because someone in MCPD had figured out Adira was federal and wanted to demonstrate their power, then his death was her responsibility. I need to finish this case, Adira said finally. You need to consider extraction. We can relocate you, provide new identity, set you up somewhere safe. I'm not running again. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. Then you need to understand what you're really facing. Vaughn isn't just a corrupt chief. He's connected to organized crime, drug trafficking, money laundering, the kind of connections that reach far beyond MCPD. If he's figured out who you are, he has resources we can't protect you from. You're asking me to abandon Carmen Rivera. I'm asking you to stay alive. They sat in silence for a moment, two women who'd fought the same battles from different angles, understanding the weight of choices that had no good outcomes. Finally, Sarah spoke again. There's something else. The timing of Miguel's death. It wasn't random. Internal communications suggest MCPD leadership knew federal attention was coming. Miguel was killed 3 days after we issued our preliminary inquiry letter. You think they killed him to send a message? I think they killed him because he was young, Latino, and expendable. But the timing suggests they also wanted to demonstrate they weren't afraid of federal oversight. Adira's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Then I definitely can't walk away. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, share it with someone who needs to see this. The revelation coming next will be talked about for years. Comment your predictions below. Let's see who called it. Back in the courthouse, afternoon proceedings brought new witnesses. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Williams, took the stand with obvious reluctance. Her testimony should have been straightforward. Cause of death, contributing factors, standard forensic analysis. Instead, it became a masterclass in institutional pressure and professional intimidation. Dr. Williams, Laura began, you conducted the autopsy on Miguel Rivera. What was your finding regarding cause of death? Cardiopulmonary arrest complicated by positional asphyxia. Could you explain that for the jury? The deceased experienced cardiac and respiratory failure. Contributing factors included pressure applied to the back and neck while in a prone position. Laura paused, consulting her notes. Doctor, did you find any evidence that police officers caused Mr. Rivera's death? Dr. Williams hesitated, glancing toward the gallery where Chief Vaughn sat watching. The immediate cause was medical emergency. The positioning may have been a contributing factor, but I cannot conclude that specific actions by law enforcement directly caused death. Adira felt her jaw clench. Dr. Williams's preliminary report obtained through discovery had been far more definitive about police responsibility. Someone had gotten to her. During cross-examination, Adira approached with copies of both the preliminary and final autopsy reports. Dr. Williams, this is your preliminary report filed 48 hours after you conducted the autopsy. Would you read the highlighted portion for the jury? Cause of death, positional asphyxia resulting from prolonged prone restraint. Manner of death, homicide. And this is your final report filed 6 weeks later. Would you read the corresponding section? Dr. Williams's voice became barely audible. Cardiopulmonary arrest. Contributing factors include positional asphyxia. Manner of death, undetermined. Doctor, what caused you to change your professional opinion between these two reports? Additional analysis, further consideration of all factors. Did anyone from the police department contact you between the preliminary and final reports? Laura objected, but Judge Garrett allowed the question. I may have received phone calls. From whom? I don't recall specifically. Adira produced another document. This is a phone log from the medical examiner's office, obtained through subpoena. It shows 17 calls from MCPD administrative offices during the 6-week period between your reports. Do you recall those conversations now? Dr. Williams looked trapped, her eyes darting between the lawyers and the hostile faces in the gallery. I was asked to reconsider certain aspects of my findings. Asked by whom? Chief Vaughn, and others. The courtroom erupted again. This time Judge Garrett had to threaten to clear the gallery entirely before order was restored. Dr. Williams, in your professional opinion, if Miguel Rivera had been placed on his side or allowed to sit upright after being restrained, would he have survived? Probably yes. Thank you. No further questions. As Dr. Williams stepped down, visibly shaking, Adira caught sight of Chief Vaughn rising from his seat. He walked with purpose toward the exit, his phone already pressed to his ear. Whatever conversation he was having, it wasn't good news for anyone on Adira's side. The day's final witness was Detective Lance Morrison, a 15-year veteran who'd been present during Miguel's arrest. Unlike his colleagues, Morrison seemed genuinely uncomfortable on the stand, his answers careful and precise. Detective Morrison, did you witness the restraint of Miguel Rivera? I did. In your opinion, was the level of force appropriate? Morrison hesitated long enough that the silence became noticeable. The situation was fluid. Mr. Rivera was resisting. But was the force appropriate? I've seen similar situations handled differently. Laura tried to rehabilitate during redirect, but Morrison's reluctance was obvious. Here was a cop with a conscience, someone who understood the difference between necessary force and excessive brutality. During a brief recess, Morrison approached the defense table. I need to tell you something, he said quietly. About that night. About what really happened. Adira glanced around the courtroom. Too many ears, too many cameras. Not here, after court. He nodded and returned to the prosecution table, but his expression suggested he was carrying weight that had become unbearable. Transform your passion for justice into real federal law enforcement power. Penn Foster's criminal justice program provides the foundation for FBI, DEA, and federal investigative careers. Online flexibility, expert instructors, and hands-on training. Don't just watch justice, enforce it. Apply now at pennfoster.edu/federal. As the court day ended, Adira remained at the defense table organizing files and preparing for the next day's proceedings. The gallery had mostly cleared, leaving behind the detritus of a day in court. Candy wrappers, forgotten notebooks, the lingering tension of unresolved conflicts. Detective Morrison waited until the last reporter had left before approaching. There's something the jury needs to know, he said without preamble. About Miguel's death. About why Miguel was really arrested that night. Adira set down her pen and gave him her full attention. It wasn't random, Morrison continued. Miguel wasn't dealing drugs. He was talking to federal agents about corruption in the neighborhood, protection rackets, drug toleration, evidence tampering. Someone found out. The pieces began clicking into place with sickening clarity. Who found out? I don't know for certain, but the arrest was ordered from upstairs. Specific instructions to bring Miguel in for processing, keep him isolated, make sure he understood the consequences of talking to feds. You think they intended to kill him? I think they intended to scare him. But Halsey has a history of going too far when he gets angry. Morrison glanced around the empty courtroom, then leaned closer. There's something else. 3 other people have died in custody over the past 2 years. All of them had been in contact with federal agents. All of them died during routine processing. Adira felt cold spread through her chest. You have proof? I have suspicions. And a conscience that won't let me sleep anymore. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small flash drive. Body cam footage from that night. The real footage, before it was edited for the official record. Why are you giving this to me? Morrison's smile was sad and tired. Because 20 years ago I became a cop to help people. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that meant protecting them from other cops too. As Morrison left, Adira sat alone in the empty courtroom with a flash drive that could change everything. Outside, night was falling on Metro City, and somewhere in the darkness, powerful people were making decisions about how far they'd go to protect their secrets. She plugged the drive into her laptop and for the first time saw what really happened the night Miguel Rivera died. The body cam footage began at 20:47 hours, 13 minutes before the official timeline. Detective Morrison's camera showed a different story than the sanitized version presented in court, one that began not with Miguel Rivera resisting arrest, but with a 17-year-old honor student walking home from his part-time job at the community center. Adira watched the timestamp as Morrison's unit pulled alongside Miguel on Maple Street. The audio was crystal clear. No call for backup, no report of suspicious activity, no justification for the stop beyond Miguel's presence in his own neighborhood after dark. Miguel Rivera? Morrison's voice, younger sounding through the digital compression. Yes, sir. Miguel's response was polite, confused. He carried a backpack full of tutoring materials and wore the blue polo shirt of the community center where he helped elementary students with homework. We need to talk to you about some federal agents who've been asking questions. The words hit Adira like a physical blow. Miguel hadn't been arrested for drug dealing. He'd been arrested for cooperating with federal investigators. Her investigators. The footage continued. Morrison calling for a transport unit, Miguel asking what he'd done wrong, the arrival of Sergeant Halsey and Detective Quinn Fairmont. What followed was a textbook example of intimidation disguised as procedure. "Smart kid like you," Quinn's voice came through clearly. "Probably going to college, right? Scholarship student? Be a shame if something happened to mess that up." Miguel's confusion transformed into fear as he began to understand this wasn't a routine stop. "I haven't done anything wrong. I answered your questions truthfully." "That's the problem," Halsey interjected, stepping into frame. Even through the body cam's wide-angle lens, his bulk was intimidating. "You've been talking to people you shouldn't talk to, about things that aren't your business." "I don't know what you mean." "Federal agents, Miguel. You've been having conversations with federal agents about neighborhood business, about police business." The fear in Miguel's eyes was heartbreaking. Here was a teenager who'd done everything right, worked hard in school, stayed out of trouble, tried to help his community, being punished for cooperating with law enforcement. "They said it was confidential," Miguel whispered. "Nothing's confidential from us," Quinn said. "We are the law in this neighborhood. We decide what happens and what doesn't happen." The transport arrived, an unmarked van instead of a standard patrol car. Miguel was handcuffed and placed in the back, still asking what charges were being filed, still believing the system would protect him. The footage jumped forward. Morrison's camera had been deactivated during transport, reactivated inside the MCPD processing facility. By then, Miguel was already in distress. His breathing was labored, his face flushed, signs of positional asphyxia that any trained officer should have recognized immediately. But instead of adjusting his position or calling for medical assistance, the officers increased the pressure. Halsey knelt on Miguel's back while two others held his legs and arms. The audio picked up their conversation. "Kid needs to learn respect. Federal agents think they can turn our people against us. Maybe next time he'll think twice before talking to outsiders." 12 minutes of pressure applied to a teenager's back and neck while he struggled to breathe. Struggled to explain that he'd only answered questions about neighborhood drug dealers. Struggled to live. 12 minutes that could have been 30 seconds if anyone in that room had chosen mercy over message sending. The footage ended with Miguel going limp, the sudden silence that followed, and the scramble to call emergency services and construct a narrative that would protect the officers involved. Adira closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of the empty courtroom, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like lead. Miguel Rivera had died because he'd talked to federal agents. Federal agents she'd recruited, guided, directed toward neighborhood sources who might help build civil rights cases. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Now you know why he really died. Stop the trial or more kids like Miguel will pay for your investigation." She screenshot the message and forwarded it to Agent Sarah Cross with a single word: escalation. The response came within minutes. "Emergency extraction protocols active. Location?" Adira typed back. "No extraction, finishing this." Her secure phone rang immediately. "Are you out of your mind?" Sarah's voice carried the tension of someone who'd spent too many years worrying about assets in the field. "They just confessed to murdering a federal informant. They're not going to stop with threats. Then we better move fast." "Adira, Miguel Rivera died because I recruited him. Carmen Rivera lost her son because I asked him to trust federal agents. I'm not walking away until his killers face justice." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Sarah sighed, the sound of someone recognizing an immovable object when she encountered one. 24 hours, she said finally. "After that, we come in loud and public and your cover becomes a historical footnote." "Understood. And Adira, watch your back. They know who you are now." The courthouse was nearly empty when Adira finally left that evening. The security guard at the front desk nodded politely as she passed, but his eyes tracked her movement with unusual attention. The elevator seemed slower than normal, the parking garage darker than she remembered. Her car sat exactly where she'd left it, but something felt wrong. Not visible damage this time, something subtler. She approached carefully, using her phone's flashlight to check for tampering. The tires were intact, no broken glass, no spray paint. But when she opened the driver's door, a manila envelope sat on the passenger seat. Inside, photographs of her apartment building, her office, the coffee shop where she met clients, surveillance photos taken with telephoto lenses over multiple days. Someone had been watching her for weeks, documenting her routines, identifying her vulnerabilities. The final photograph showed her having lunch with Agent Sarah Cross. Both women were clearly visible, their faces unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. The message was clear. "We know who you really are, and we know who you work with." Adira drove home through empty streets, checking her mirrors for surveillance, taking random turns to see if anyone followed. The city felt different at night, more dangerous, full of shadows that might hide threats. Every police car she passed could contain officers who wanted her silent. Every intersection could be a place where accidents happened to problematic federal agents. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. But she checked anyway. Closets, behind doors, under furniture. The habits of someone who'd spent 3 years living a lie, surrounded by people who would kill her if they discovered the truth. She poured a glass of wine and sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the day's events and planning tomorrow's strategy. The body cam footage was evidence, but evidence required authentication and chain of custody documentation. Detective Morrison would need to testify about how he'd preserved the original files, why he'd kept them separate from the official record. But Morrison was taking an enormous risk. Police officers who testified against their colleagues faced retaliation that could destroy careers, families, lives. She needed to give him reasons to continue cooperating, protection from the consequences of doing the right thing. Her laptop chimed with an encrypted email from Agent Cross. No text, just an attachment. A federal warrant application for the arrest of multiple MCPD officers on civil rights violations. The charges were serious. Conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and murder in the death of Miguel Rivera. But warrants required approval from multiple levels of federal bureaucracy. Even expedited processing would take days, maybe weeks. Miguel Rivera's trial would be over long before federal cavalry arrived. She opened a new document and began typing a motion to introduce additional evidence. The real body cam footage, Detective Morrison's testimony about the federal informant program, documentation of the systematic targeting of federal cooperators. The motion would blow apart the prosecution's narrative and expose the conspiracy behind Miguel's death. It would also paint a target on her back larger than anything she'd faced so far. At midnight, her doorbell rang. Adira approached the door carefully, checking the peephole before opening. Detective Morrison stood in the hallway, looking older than he had in court that afternoon. His eyes kept moving, scanning for threats that might be following him. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She let him inside, checking the hallway before closing and locking the door behind him. Morrison moved like someone who expected to be shot. Quick glances at windows, positioning himself away from direct sightlines. "They know I gave you the footage," he said without preamble. "Internal Affairs called me in for a meeting tomorrow morning. Unauthorized release of evidence, violations of department policy, conduct unbecoming an officer. They're trying to discredit you before you can testify. It's worse than that." Morrison sat heavily on her couch, suddenly looking every one of his 40-plus years. "They found the backup files I made, the documentation I kept of federal cooperation requests. 23 cases over the past 3 years where community members provided information to federal agents and later died in police custody or disappeared entirely." Adira felt her blood turn to ice water. 23? Miguel wasn't the first. He wasn't even the 10th. Morrison pulled out his phone, showing her a list of names and dates. Maria Santos, 18, overdose in holding cell after talking to federal agents about drug protection rackets. James Washington, 24, heart attack during arrest 3 days after providing information about evidence tampering. Patricia Gonzalez, 16, suicide by hanging while in protective custody. The list continued. Young people, mostly minorities, mostly from neighborhoods where police corruption was endemic. All of them had provided information to federal investigators. All of them had died under suspicious circumstances that were ruled accidental, natural, or self-inflicted. "You have proof these deaths are connected?" Internal communications, scheduling records showing the same officers involved in multiple cases. Medical examiner reports that were altered after initial findings. Morrison's voice was hollow, exhausted. "They've been systematically murdering federal informants for 3 years, and I helped by staying silent. You're helping now. Now might be too late. For me, for you, for anyone else who gets in their way." Morrison stood, pacing to the window to peer through the blinds at the street below. "There's something else. About your cover. They've known who you really are for months, maybe longer. The federal investigation you think is secret? They've been feeding you information, manipulating what you discover, controlling the narrative." Adira's carefully constructed world began to crumble. "What do you mean?" "The corruption you documented, the civil rights violations, the evidence of systematic abuse. It's all real, but it's also surface level. The real operation goes much deeper. Drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking. MCPD isn't just corrupt. It's a criminal organization with badges. And they let me document the small stuff while protecting the big picture." "Exactly. You were never undercover. You were a pressure valve, allowing them to expose expendable officers while protecting the core conspiracy. Morrison returned to the couch, his expression grim. But Miguel Rivera changed everything. He didn't just know about police corruption. He'd witnessed drug money being laundered through city contracts, seen evidence of federal officials being paid to look the other way. He was going to expose the whole operation. So they killed him. They killed him, but they made it look like routine brutality instead of assassination. And they let you pursue the civil rights case because it keeps everyone focused on excessive force instead of organized crime. The full scope of the manipulation hit Adira like a physical blow. Her 3-year investigation, her carefully built case files, her federal contacts, all of it orchestrated to protect a criminal conspiracy that reached far beyond local police corruption. How many people are involved? Federal prosecutors, judges, city officials, police leadership. Maybe 50 people total, spread across multiple agencies and jurisdictions. Morrison checked his phone, frowning at whatever message he'd received. And they're moving tonight. Multiple arrests planned for federal agents and local assets who've become liabilities. Including me, especially you. The only reason you're still alive is because killing a federal agent brings too much attention. But if they can arrange an accident, a suicide, a random street crime, Morrison's phone buzzed again. This time his face went pale as he read the message. We need to leave. Now. What? That was my contact in dispatch. Multiple units heading to this address. SWAT deployment authorized for armed and dangerous federal fugitive. Adira felt her training kick in, the calm that came with imminent danger. How long? 5 minutes, maybe less. She grabbed her laptop, the flash drive with Morrison's footage, and a go-bag she'd kept packed since leaving the bureau. 3 years of careful preparation compressed into 60 seconds of essential items and emergency protocols. They left through the building's service entrance, Morrison's police radio providing real-time updates on the approaching units. 6 patrol cars, a SWAT team, and air support for a single federal agent who supposedly posed an imminent threat to public safety. Where are we going? Morrison asked as they reached his unmarked police car. Federal courthouse. If they want to arrest me, they can do it legally and publicly instead of arranging an accident in my apartment. The drive through downtown Metro City felt like traveling through enemy territory. Every police car was a potential threat, every traffic stop a possible ambush. Morrison navigated using backstreets and alleyways, avoiding major intersections where roadblocks might be waiting. There's something else you need to know, he said as they approached the courthouse district. About your partner, Olivia Sterling. She's not who you think she is. Adira's blood turned cold. Explain. Stanford law, that's real. Corporate litigation background, also real. But her connection to police accountability work, that came from somebody else. Somebody who wanted her close to you, monitoring your cases, reporting on your investigation methods. She's been spying on me? For 3 years, feeding information to people who've been staying one step ahead of your federal investigation because they always knew what you were planning next. The betrayal cut deeper than professional compromise. Olivia had been her closest friend, her confidant, the person she trusted with fears and doubts she couldn't share with anyone else. To learn that trust had been weaponized against federal investigation and the people it was supposed to protect felt like losing another piece of her identity. How do you know this? Because I was asked to recruit her. Internal Affairs approached me 2 years ago, told me to identify lawyers who might be useful for monitoring federal activities. I gave them Olivia's name because she was clean, competent, and had the right background. I didn't know they were planning to use her against you. The federal courthouse loomed ahead, its neoclassical columns illuminated by floodlights that made the building look more like a fortress than a temple of justice. Security was heavy even at this late hour. Armed guards, metal detectors, surveillance cameras that tracked every approach. But it was also federal territory, a place where local police had limited jurisdiction and federal protective protocols took precedence. If Adira could reach the building's interior, she'd be under federal protection until the situation could be resolved through proper legal channels. You can't come with me, she told Morrison as they parked a block away. You're still MCPD. Walking into federal courthouse with me makes you look like a collaborator. I am a collaborator. After 15 years of staying silent while good people died, I'm finally doing something right. Then stay alive long enough to testify. Miguel Rivera deserves justice, but not at the cost of another good cop's life. Morrison handed her a second flash drive. Complete files on all 23 deaths, medical examiner reports, internal communications, surveillance footage, everything I could gather without triggering security protocols. Morrison, Lance, why are you doing this? His smile was sad, tired, but genuine. Because I became a cop to protect people. Took me 15 years to remember. That includes protecting them from other cops. They separated at the courthouse steps. Morrison disappeared into the shadows between buildings, while Adira approached the main entrance, knowing security cameras were recording her every step, knowing people in various agencies were making decisions about whether she reached the building alive. The guards recognized her, not as Adira Stone, civil rights attorney, but as Special Agent Stone, federal law enforcement. The recognition was subtle, a slight change in posture, a more formal tone of voice, but unmistakable to someone trained to read micro-expressions and body language. "Agent Stone," the senior guard said quietly, "we've been expecting you." Expecting me. Emergency protective custody protocols, authorized by Assistant Director Cross 20 minutes ago. Sarah had been busy. Emergency protective custody meant federal marshals, safe houses, and temporary suspension of normal legal procedures. It also meant the situation had escalated beyond anything local authorities could handle through normal channels. How bad is it? Multiple arrest warrants being executed simultaneously. Federal judges, local prosecutors, police leadership, the kind of roundup that happens when organized crime infiltrates law enforcement. They escorted her through security, past the public areas, into the secure floors where federal law enforcement conducted business too sensitive for public observation. Agent Cross waited in a conference room that looked more like a military command center. Multiple screens showing surveillance feeds, communications equipment, tactical maps of Metro City with various locations marked in red. "You look like hell," Sarah said by way of greeting. "Feel worse. How much did you know? About the scope of the corruption? We suspected it was bigger than your reports indicated. About the systematic targeting of informants? That's new intelligence, and it's changed everything." Sarah gestured to the screens showing real-time surveillance footage from across the city. Police cars, SWAT teams, federal agents, all moving in coordinated patterns that suggested a massive law enforcement operation in progress. 26 arrests tonight, Sarah explained. Police officers, prosecutors, judges, city officials. The largest corruption bust in Metro City history, and it's happening because Miguel Rivera's death finally gave us enough evidence to convince federal prosecutors to act. What about Detective Morrison? Federal protection. He's testifying before a grand jury tomorrow morning, and after that he disappears into witness protection until trials are completed. Adira studied the surveillance feeds, recognizing familiar faces among the people being arrested in dramatic pre-dawn raids. Chief Marshal Vaughan, taken into custody outside his suburban home. Captain Cole Brennan, arrested in the MCPD parking garage. Lieutenant Reese Donovan, handcuffed in front of his family. And Brock Halsey. Sarah's expression darkened. Gone. Disappeared sometime after court ended today. We have Bolos out, but he's probably in another state by now. Or dead. People like Vaughn don't leave loose ends. Either way, he's not our primary concern. The federal case doesn't depend on his testimony. They watched in silence as the arrests continued across the city. A criminal network dismantled in real time. Years of federal investigation culminating in a single night of justice that felt both satisfying and incomplete. "There's something else," Sarah said eventually. "About your law partner." Morrison told me. "Olivia Sterling's been reporting on my activities." "Not exactly. She was recruited to monitor you, yes, but she's been feeding us information about her contacts within the corruption network. Double agent playing all sides while providing intelligence that helped build tonight's cases." The revelation hit Adira like whiplash. She's been working for the Bureau? Freelance contractor. Recruited after law school, trained in basic intelligence gathering, assigned to your firm to monitor police accountability cases and identify corruption patterns. For 3 years I thought she was my friend. She is your friend. That's why this assignment was so effective. Her cover required genuine emotional investment, real professional relationship, authentic personal connection. But it also required her to betray your trust repeatedly for operational security. Adira sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The day had begun with a civil rights trial and ended with federal raids targeting organized crime. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her work, her relationships had been revealed as layers of deception designed to protect investigations she'd been conducting without knowing their true scope. What happens now? Now you get some rest while we process the arrests and prepare for arraignments. Tomorrow you testify before a federal grand jury about your undercover work in Miguel Rivera's death. After that, Sarah shrugged. After that, you get to decide whether you want to remain in law enforcement or pursue other options. Other options? Private practice, academic teaching, consulting work. The Bureau can provide excellent references for someone with your skills and experience. Through the conference room's windows, dawn was beginning to break over Metro City. The skyline looked the same as always, but everything underneath had changed. A criminal network that had operated with impunity for years had been dismantled in a single night, and the reverberations would continue for months as trials, convictions, and reforms slowly restored integrity to institutions that had been corrupted from within. If that reveal just blew your mind, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, did you see that coming? Subscribe, because our next story features another undercover agent whose hidden identity toppled an entire criminal empire. The third day of Miguel Rivera's trial began with chaos. News of the overnight federal raids had broken during early morning broadcasts, sending shockwaves through Metro City's legal community and beyond. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters, federal agents, and protesters demanding answers about police corruption and federal oversight. Inside Department 8, the atmosphere was electric with tension and uncertainty. Half the gallery seats that had been occupied by police supporters now sat empty. Their intended occupants were either under arrest or too afraid to show public support for colleagues facing federal charges. Judge Garrett called the court to order with unusual formality, her expression suggesting she'd been briefed on overnight developments but wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. Counselors, before we continue with the civil trial, I need to address the changed circumstances created by federal law enforcement actions. Miss Davies, I understand several key witnesses from your case are no longer available. Laura Davies stood slowly, her composure cracked but still professional. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a continuance pending resolution of federal criminal proceedings. Multiple witnesses are currently in federal custody and unable to testify. Miss Stone, what's the defense position? Adira rose, feeling the weight of every eye in the courtroom. Your Honor, the defense opposes any continuance. Miguel Rivera's family has waited long enough for justice, and federal criminal proceedings may take years to resolve. The civil case should proceed based on available evidence. With respect, Your Honor, Laura interjected, the defense attorney's own federal connections raise questions about potential conflicts of interest and prosecutorial coordination that— Objection! Adira's voice carried new authority, the kind that came from federal backup and legal immunity. Counsel is speculating about matters not in evidence. Judge Garrett studied both attorneys carefully. Miss Stone, are you currently operating under federal protection or immunity? The courtroom fell silent, everyone understanding that the answer would determine whether the trial continued or collapsed entirely. Yes, Your Honor. As of last evening, I'm under federal protective custody due to threats against my safety arising from this case. And does that protective status affect your ability to represent the Rivera family's interests? No, Your Honor. If anything, it ensures I can pursue their case without intimidation from local law enforcement. Carmen Rivera stood in the gallery, her voice clear and strong despite the chaos surrounding her. Your Honor, my family wants the trial to continue. We want the truth about my son's death to be heard, regardless of what federal prosecutors decide to do about criminal charges. Judge Garrett nodded slowly. Very well, but I'm limiting further proceedings to evidence and witnesses currently available. Miss Stone, if you have additional evidence to present, now would be the appropriate time. Adira approached the bench with a flash drive in her hand. Your Honor, I move to introduce Exhibit A47, authentic body camera footage from the night Miguel Rivera died, preserved by Detective Lance Morrison and verified by federal digital forensics analysts. The courtroom erupted. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicked, and the few remaining police supporters began filing toward the exits. Everyone understood that authentic footage would either vindicate or condemn the official narrative surrounding Miguel's death. Objection! Laura was on her feet immediately. Chain of custody hasn't been established, and the source of this footage has been verified by federal agents and is being presented as part of an ongoing civil rights investigation. Adira cut her off. Detective Morrison will testify to its authenticity. Judge Garrett looked exhausted but determined. I'll allow it subject to foundation testimony from Detective Morrison. Detective Morrison entered the courtroom under federal marshal protection, his face pale but resolute. He'd aged years overnight. The stress of choosing between loyalty and conscience finally resolved, but at enormous personal cost. Detective Morrison, Adira began, did you preserve original body camera footage from the night Miguel Rivera died? I did. Why did you preserve separate footage rather than relying on official departmental records? Morrison's voice carried clearly through the silent courtroom. Because I was ordered to edit the official footage, to remove portions that showed excessive force and evidence of premeditation. The gallery gasped, but Morrison continued steadily. The footage being presented today contains the complete record of events. including conversations between officers before and during Miguel Rivera's detention. Who ordered you to edit the official record? Lieutenant Reese Donovan, acting on instructions from Captain Cole Brennan. And what would have happened if you'd refused to edit the footage? Morrison met her eyes directly. Based on what happened to other officers who questioned illegal orders, I would have faced disciplinary action, transfer to undesirable assignments, or termination. Possibly worse. Possibly worse how? Over the past 3 years, 5 police officers who reported misconduct or refused to participate in cover-ups died in off-duty incidents. Car accidents, apparent suicides, random street crimes. Internal statistics suggest a mortality rate among whistleblowing officers 30 times higher than the general population. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for the hum of recording devices and the scratch of reporters' pens. Detective Morrison, are you testifying under federal immunity? Yes. In exchange for my testimony, federal prosecutors have guaranteed protection for my family and new identities through the Witness Protection Program. Adira returned to the evidence table and activated the courtroom's projection system. Your Honor, I'd like to show the complete unedited footage of Miguel Rivera's final night. The lights dimmed, and Miguel Rivera's face appeared on screen. 17 years old, frightened but trying to maintain dignity as police officers explained why he was being arrested. Not for drug dealing, not for resisting authority, but for cooperating with federal investigators who were trying to protect his community from police corruption. The footage played in complete silence. Every person in the courtroom watching Miguel's gradual realization that he was going to die. His desperate attempts to explain that he'd only tried to help. His final pleas for mercy as officers applied fatal pressure to his neck and back. 12 minutes of systematic murder disguised as law enforcement procedure. When the footage ended, Carmen Rivera was sobbing quietly, supported by family members who had never seen the truth about their son's death. Several jurors were crying openly, their faces reflecting horror and rage at what they'd witnessed. Judge Garrett called a brief recess, but the damage to the prosecution's case was complete and irreversible. No jury could watch that footage and conclude Miguel Rivera had died from a medical emergency unrelated to police actions. During the recess, Adira noticed unusual activity in the hallway. Federal agents in business suits, courthouse security personnel with tactical gear, and local law enforcement officials engaged in intense discussions near the building's exits. Agent Sarah Cross appeared at her elbow, speaking quietly. We have a problem. What kind of problem? Sergeant Brock Halsey. He's not missing. He's here, in the courthouse, and he's armed. Adira felt ice form in her stomach. How did he get past security? Police credentials still valid for another few hours, until formal suspension paperwork is processed. He entered through the employee entrance 30 minutes ago. Where is he now? Unknown, but he sent a message to courthouse security threatening to finish what federal agents started and make sure traitors face justice. The implications were clear. Brock had come to kill her, and he had the training and access to succeed. A 22-year police veteran loose in a federal courthouse with a personal vendetta and nothing left to lose. Evacuation protocols? Already initiated. Federal marshals are clearing non-essential personnel, but the trial participants need to remain for security reasons. Safer to have you in a controlled environment with federal protection than scattered across the city. They returned to the courtroom, which now resembled an armed camp more than a place of legal proceedings. Federal marshals had positioned themselves at strategic locations, their earpieces active, their eyes scanning constantly for threats. Judge Garrett resumed proceedings with obvious reluctance. Given security concerns, I'm limiting further testimony to essential witnesses only. Miss Stone, do you have additional evidence to present? Yes, Your Honor. I call Special Agent Sarah Cross to testify about federal civil rights investigations related to this case. Sarah approached the witness stand with the bearing of someone accustomed to high-stakes testimony. Her credentials were impeccable. 15 years with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, specialist in police misconduct cases, lead investigator on several landmark prosecutions. Agent Cross, is the FBI currently investigating civil rights violations by Metro City Police Department? Yes, an 18-month investigation into systematic violations of citizens' constitutional rights, including excessive force, false arrest, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Is Miguel Rivera's death part of that investigation? Miguel Rivera was a federal informant providing information about police corruption. His death is being investigated as a potential civil rights violation under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. Section 242. And what have federal investigators concluded about the circumstances of his death? Sarah's voice carried the authority of federal law enforcement backed by documentary evidence. We've concluded that Miguel Rivera was murdered by Metro City police officers to prevent his testimony in federal proceedings. His death was not accidental, not the result of medical emergency, but premeditated assassination designed to intimidate other potential witnesses. The words hung in the courtroom air like an explosive charge waiting to detonate. Federal agents had officially concluded that local police had committed murder to obstruct federal investigations, a finding that would trigger congressional hearings, Justice Department oversight, and criminal prosecutions reaching the highest levels of local government. Agent Cross, do federal authorities have evidence of other similar deaths? 23 deaths over the past 3 years, all involving individuals who had provided information to federal investigators. Statistical analysis suggests systematic targeting rather than coincidental mortality. Laura Davies rose desperately. Objection! This testimony is beyond the scope of civil proceedings, and the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the courtroom in red glare that made everyone look like figures in a nightmare. Federal marshals moved swiftly, surrounding key witnesses and officials, their weapons drawn but pointed safely downward. Ladies and gentlemen, remain calm. Judge Garrett's voice carried authority despite the chaos. Federal marshals will escort everyone to secure locations while building security resolves technical difficulties. But Adira knew this wasn't a technical difficulty. Brock Halsey had found a way to cut power to the courthouse, creating confusion and darkness that would mask his approach. A trained police officer with intimate knowledge of building layout and security protocols could use the temporary chaos to reach targets who would be vulnerable during evacuation procedures. Agent Cross moved to Adira's side, one hand on her service weapon, her voice low but urgent. Emergency protocols. We move together, stay low. Federal marshals provide escort to secure extraction point. They began moving toward the courthouse's rear exit, part of a coordinated evacuation that would protect everyone involved from whatever Brock Halsey had planned. But as they reached the hallway, emergency lighting illuminated a figure standing near the building's central staircase. Sergeant Brock Halsey, still wearing his police uniform, still carrying the authority of 22 years in law enforcement, but now pointing a service weapon at the crowd of federal agents, court officials, and civilians trying to evacuate safely. That's far enough, his voice echoed through the marble corridors. Nobody moves until we settle this. Federal marshals immediately established positions, their own weapons trained on Brock while maintaining awareness of civilian safety. The hallway became a tactical standoff. Federal agents protecting their people, local police officer threatening to kill anyone who challenged his authority. Sergeant Halsey, Agent Cross called out, lower your weapon. You're surrounded by federal agents in a federal building. There's no way this ends well for you. Brock's laugh was harsh, bitter. It doesn't end well for me anyway. Career destroyed, pension gone, federal prosecution guaranteed. Might as well take some traitors with me. His weapon swung toward Adira specifically. 3 years you pretended to be our partner. 3 years you documented our conversations, recorded our procedures, gathered evidence to destroy everything we'd built. And for what? To protect drug dealers and gangbangers who hate cops anyway? I was protecting the community from police officers who think badges give them permission to commit murder, Adira replied, her voice steady despite the weapon pointed at her chest. Miguel Rivera was a drug dealer, just like his friends, just like everyone in that neighborhood who makes our job impossible. Miguel Rivera was an honor student working 2 jobs to help his family while tutoring elementary students in his spare time. Agent Cross stepped slightly forward, positioning herself between Brock and Adira. He provided information about actual drug dealers because he wanted to protect his community. He was a snitch who got what snitches get. He was a 17-year-old boy who believed the police would protect him if he did the right thing. The standoff stretched into seconds that felt like hours. Federal marshals maintained their positions but couldn't risk firing while civilians remained in potential crossfire zones. Brock had chosen his location strategically. Central position with good sightlines, civilians close enough to complicate any tactical response. You know what the real crime is? Brock continued, his weapon still trained on Adira. The real crime is federal agents thinking they can come into our city, turn our people against us, and destroy institutions that keep communities safe. We're the thin blue line between civilization and chaos. And you've been systematically destroying that line. The thin blue line? Adira took a small step forward, drawing Brock's attention away from other potential targets. Or a wall of silence protecting criminal cops from accountability? 22 years I've served this city. 22 years protecting people who hate me, arresting criminals who'll be back on the street within hours, filling out paperwork that disappears into bureaucratic black holes. And what do I get for it? Federal investigations, media scrutiny, community protests demanding my job. You get a paycheck, benefits, and legal authority to use force against citizens. In exchange, you're supposed to follow the law and protect constitutional rights. Miguel Rivera had constitutional rights. Miguel Rivera was a criminal. Miguel Rivera was murdered by police officers who thought their badges placed them above the law. Brock's face twisted with rage and frustration. You want to know about murder? You want to know what really happened that night? Tell me. He wouldn't stop talking. Kept saying he'd told federal agents everything. Kept threatening to testify against officers who were just doing their jobs. We tried to scare him, tried to make him understand that snitching has consequences. But he just kept running his mouth, saying he had evidence, saying federal prosecutors would protect him. The confession spilled out in a torrent of anger and self-justification. So yeah, we shut him up permanently, and we do it again because sometimes that's what it takes to maintain order. You murdered a 17-year-old boy to protect police corruption. I eliminated a threat to law enforcement effectiveness in a high-crime neighborhood. Agent Cross spoke into her earpiece, probably recording Brock's confession and coordinating tactical response. But Adira could see determination in his eyes that suggested he didn't plan to survive this confrontation. Sergeant Halsey, she said carefully, you still have choices. Lower your weapon, surrender to federal authorities, cooperate with ongoing investigations. Your knowledge of police corruption could help federal prosecutors build cases that actually improve law enforcement instead of protecting criminal officers. Cooperate? Brock spat. Like Miguel Rivera cooperated? Like Detective Morrison cooperated? You people destroy everyone who helps you. Then move on to the next city, the next department, the next group of officers trying to do impossible jobs under impossible circumstances. We protect people who have the courage to do what's right. You protect people who betray their colleagues for federal immunity and witness protection payoffs. The conversation was interrupted by new movement in the hallway. Additional figures approaching from the courthouse's secondary entrances. But these weren't federal agents or security personnel. Detective Quinn Fairmont approached from the east corridor. Captain Cole Brennan from the west. Both armed, both moving with purpose. Adira realized with sinking certainty that Brock hadn't acted alone. Despite federal arrests and ongoing raids, enough corrupt officers remained free to mount a coordinated assault on federal witnesses and agents. Looks like backup has arrived, Brock said with grim satisfaction. Now we can finish this properly. The tactical situation had become exponentially more dangerous. 3 armed police officers with inside knowledge of building layout, emergency procedures, and federal protective protocols, multiple civilian hostages, limited federal response options, and suspects who clearly didn't intend to surrender peacefully. Agent Cross spoke rapidly into her earpiece, calling for additional federal backup and coordinating evacuation of remaining civilians. But help would take time to arrive, and the immediate situation required resolution before more people died. Quinn, Adira called out, recognizing her former colleague. You don't have to do this. Federal prosecutors might still offer immunity in exchange for cooperation. Quinn's smile was cold, professional. Immunity for what? Protecting my community from federal overreach? Maintaining law and order in neighborhoods where social workers and civil rights lawyers fear to tread? Immunity for conspiracy to commit civil rights violations under color of law. 18 U.S.C. Section 241 carries 20 years to life if death results from the conspiracy. Only if federal prosecutors can prove conspiracy. Hard to do when key witnesses are no longer available. Captain Brennan had reached a position that gave him clear fields of fire covering both directions of the hallway. His police training was evident in his movement and positioning. This was a coordinated tactical operation, not desperate individuals acting impulsively. Captain, Agent Cross addressed him directly. You're threatening federal agents in a federal building. Whatever local issues you're trying to resolve, this creates federal jurisdiction that will bring resources you can't possibly match. Federal jurisdiction? Brennan laughed harshly. You've been investigating us for 18 months with unlimited resources, sophisticated surveillance, and embedded agents. And what do you have to show for it? A few low-level corruption cases and 1 dead drug dealer who should have kept his mouth shut. We have federal indictments against 26 members of organized criminal conspiracy operating under color of police authority. We have documentary evidence of systematic civil rights violations. We have testimony from multiple witnesses detailing murders, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. You had those things, past tense. The implication was chilling. Despite federal protection, witness security, and ongoing investigations, the corruption network retained enough power to eliminate evidence and silence testimony. But Agent Cross wasn't intimidated. You're making assumptions about federal capabilities that could prove fatal. Every conversation in this building is being recorded by multiple systems. Every word you've spoken has been transmitted to federal prosecutors, federal judges, and Justice Department oversight officials. Killing federal agents won't stop prosecutions. It will guarantee them, unless there are no federal agents left alive to testify. The standoff had reached its breaking point. 3 corrupt police officers with nothing left to lose, facing federal agents sworn to protect witnesses and uphold constitutional law. Civilians caught in between, including Carmen Rivera, who had come seeking justice for her murdered son and found herself in the middle of a war between local corruption and federal authority. Mrs. Rivera, Adira called out softly, "Whatever happens next, know that your son's death meant something." Miguel's courage in speaking truth to power has exposed corruption that's been destroying communities for years. He didn't die in vain. Carmen's voice was steady, dignified despite her fear. My son believed police officers would protect him if he did what was right. He trusted the system to care about justice more than protecting itself. He was wrong about local police, Agent Cross added, but right about federal law enforcement. Miguel's testimony and Detective Morrison's evidence will ensure convictions, regardless of what happens here. Nothing's going to happen here, Brock said with false confidence. We're going to walk out of this building, and federal investigators are going to discover that their key witnesses have developed sudden amnesia about police corruption cases. That's not how federal investigations work. It's how they work when local law enforcement maintains operational control of crime scenes and evidence preservation. The threat was clear. They intended to kill federal agents and witnesses, then use their police authority to control the subsequent investigation and cover up what had happened. But they'd underestimated federal preparation and the speed of institutional response to threats against federal agents. New sounds echoed through the courthouse: heavy footsteps, tactical radio communications, the unmistakable noise of federal reinforcements arriving in force. The FBI's hostage rescue team, U.S. Marshals Special Operations Group, and other federal tactical units responding to reports of officers down and agents under fire. "Game over," Agent Cross said simply. Through the courthouse's tall windows, red and blue lights painted the building's interior in alternating colors. Local police units, federal law enforcement vehicles, emergency responders, and media trucks drawn by reports of a law enforcement crisis in progress. Captain Brennan spoke into his police radio, but the response was immediate and devastating. All MCPD units are ordered to stand down and withdraw from federal crime scene perimeter. This is now an exclusively federal operation under Justice Department authority. Even corrupted local law enforcement couldn't maintain the pretense of jurisdiction when federal agents were under direct threat. "Still think you're walking out of here?" Adira asked. Brock's response was to swing his weapon toward Carmen Rivera. "Maybe not all of us walk out, but we can make sure federal witnesses don't either." The next few seconds unfolded with the brutal efficiency of federal tactical training meeting desperate police resistance. Agent Cross moved first, drawing her weapon while simultaneously pushing Adira toward protective cover behind marble pillars. Federal marshals responded immediately, their training focused on protecting witnesses and federal personnel from threats. Brock fired twice, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, but federal agents were already moving, their superior numbers and training creating overwhelming tactical advantage. Quinn Fairmont attempted to flank federal positions but ran into additional marshals who'd been positioning throughout the building. Captain Brennan tried to use civilian shields but found his movement restricted by federal agents who'd trained extensively for hostage situations. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. When it ended, 3 corrupt police officers lay wounded but alive, disarmed and restrained by federal agents while emergency medical personnel provided treatment. No federal agents had been seriously injured. No civilian hostages had been harmed. The tactical response had been textbook federal procedure. Overwhelming force applied with precision to neutralize threats while protecting innocent people. Agent Cross helped Adira to her feet, checking for injuries from the brief firefight. "Welcome to Federal Witness Protection, she said with grim humor. "Hope you enjoyed your last day practicing small-town civil rights law." The aftermath of the courthouse shootout dominated national news for weeks. Federal agents engaging corrupt police officers inside a federal courthouse while protecting civil rights witnesses became a symbol of institutional conflict between local law enforcement and federal authority. Miguel Rivera's civil trial resumed 1 week later, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict in favor of the Rivera family: $8.5 million in compensatory and punitive damages, plus injunctive relief requiring federal oversight of MCPD use of force policies. Carmen Rivera stood on the courthouse steps afterward, surrounded by media and civil rights advocates, her voice carrying clearly in the afternoon sunlight. My son Miguel believed that doing the right thing would protect him from the wrong people. He was 17 years old, and he thought police officers were supposed to be the good guys. She paused, composing herself. Miguel was wrong about local police, but he was right about justice. Today's verdict proves that truth eventually surfaces, even when powerful people try to bury it. Adira stood nearby, but she was no longer Adira Stone, civil rights attorney. Federal witness protection protocols had activated the moment weapons were drawn in the federal courthouse. Her civilian cover was blown beyond repair. Her legal practice would be dissolved. Her carefully constructed post-bureau life had ended in gunfire and federal marshals. Special Agent Adira Stone would soon receive new assignment to the FBI's Civil Rights Division, where her experience with police corruption investigations made her invaluable for cases across the country. But the quiet satisfaction of helping individual families seek justice would be replaced by the institutional imperatives of federal law enforcement. Broader investigations, longer timelines, bureaucratic constraints that often frustrated people seeking immediate accountability. Detective Lance Morrison had already disappeared into witness protection, along with his family. His testimony before federal grand juries had secured indictments against 34 police officers, prosecutors, and city officials. But the cost of doing the right thing was permanent exile from everything he'd known: career, community, identity sacrificed for the possibility that other officers might find courage to speak truth to power. The federal trials would continue for years. Captain Cole Brennan, Detective Quinn Fairmont, and Sergeant Brock Halsey faced federal charges carrying life sentences if convicted. Chief Marshal Vaughn and other senior officials would spend months in pretrial detention while prosecutors built cases involving conspiracy, racketeering, and civil rights violations. But some justice remained incomplete. Financial settlements couldn't resurrect murdered teenagers. Federal oversight couldn't instantly transform police culture that had been corrupted over decades. And for every officer held accountable, others remained in positions where they could continue abusing power while avoiding federal scrutiny. 6 months later, Agent Sarah Cross met Adira at a coffee shop in Washington, D.C., where she'd been assigned to FBI headquarters pending new operational deployment. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked, studying her former asset who'd become a colleague again. "About giving up civilian life? Some days." Adira stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I was good at helping individual families fight City Hall. Now I'm part of federal apparatus that can take years to achieve results those families needed immediately. But your work in Metro City prevented other Miguel Riveras from dying while federal agents gathered evidence about police corruption. Maybe it just forced corrupt officers to be more careful about who they murder and how they cover it up." Sarah's expression suggested she understood the moral complexity of police accountability work. Victories that felt incomplete, progress that came at enormous cost to individuals willing to sacrifice everything for institutional change. "There's something else," Sarah said, "about Olivia Sterling." Adira had been expecting this conversation. Her former law partner had disappeared immediately after federal raids began. Her 3 years of reporting on Adira's activities finally exposed when arrest warrants revealed the scope of Bureau surveillance operations. "She's requesting permission to contact you. Wants to explain her role in the investigation, apologize for the deception, try to repair personal relationship. And what does the Bureau recommend? That's your decision. Her intelligence was crucial for protecting your cover and identifying corruption targets. But she also violated your trust repeatedly while reporting on your professional and personal activities. The betrayal still stung. Not just professional compromise, but personal friendship weaponized for operational purposes. Olivia had been the closest thing to family Adira had developed since leaving federal service, and learning that intimacy had been performance required for intelligence gathering left her questioning whether genuine human connection was possible while living double lives. "Maybe someday," Adira said finally, "when I can separate personal hurt from operational necessity." Speaking of operational necessity, Sarah produced a manila folder marked with federal classification headers. "New assignment, if you're interested. Chicago Police Department. Systematic corruption investigation. Embedded agent needed for 3-year deployment." Adira opened the folder and reviewed preliminary intelligence assessments. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Excessive force complaints ignored by supervisors, evidence tampering in high-profile cases, federal informants dying under suspicious circumstances. How many dead witnesses this time? 17 over 2 years. All minorities, all from neighborhoods where police corruption enables drug trafficking and organized crime. Local FBI response? Limited. Chicago PD has successfully deflected federal oversight through political connections and institutional resistance. They need someone with your experience in police culture and undercover operations. The assignment represented both opportunity and burden, chance to prevent more Miguel Riveras from dying, but also probability of spending years surrounded by officers who would kill her if they discovered her true identity. Timeline for decision? 2 weeks. After that, the window closes and Chicago investigation continues without embedded assets. Adira closed the folder and sat back in her chair, watching afternoon sunlight illuminate Washington's tree-lined streets. Somewhere in Chicago, police officers were probably abusing their authority while supervisors looked the other way. Somewhere, families were grieving children who'd been killed for cooperating with law enforcement. Somewhere, people like Detective Morrison were wrestling with consciences that demanded action despite personal cost. "I'll take it," she said quietly. Sarah nodded, unsurprised but still relieved. "Training starts in 3 weeks. New identity, new background, new life. Again." "What about the Metro City trials?" "You'll testify by secure video link when necessary. Your identity will be protected through federal court procedures, but your testimony will still be available for prosecution purposes." They finished their coffee in comfortable silence, 2 federal agents understanding the weight of choosing duty over personal satisfaction, institutional justice over individual relationships. As they prepared to leave, Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Her expression changed as she read it. "Problem? Intel update from Metro City. 3 more deaths in police custody since federal oversight began. All ruled accidental or medical emergencies. All involving individuals who'd expressed interest in cooperating with ongoing federal investigations." The news hit Adira like cold water. Despite arrests, trials, and federal monitoring, the killing continued. Officers who'd escaped prosecution were sending messages to potential witnesses. Federal protection had limits. Federal agents couldn't prevent all retaliation. Speaking truth to power still carried deadly consequences. "Chicago assignment just became more urgent," Sarah continued. "Whatever network we dismantled in Metro City has connections in other cities. We need embedded agents identifying targets before body counts get higher." Adira gathered her things with renewed purpose. Miguel Rivera's death had exposed corruption in one police department, but the battle for constitutional law enforcement was far from over. Every city harbored officers who believed badges placed them above accountability. Every community included people willing to risk their lives for justice if someone would listen to their stories. The work would continue. In Chicago, in other cities, wherever federal agents could gather evidence of systematic civil rights violations. Sometimes justice would be swift and complete. Sometimes it would be partial and delayed. Sometimes it would fail entirely, leaving families like the Riveras to grieve while their children's killers escaped accountability. But the work would continue because alternatives, accepting police corruption, tolerating systematic violations of constitutional rights, allowing badge-wearing criminals to operate with impunity, were worse than the incomplete justice federal agents could provide. 3 weeks later, Agent Adira Stone began her new life as a Chicago police officer, carrying Miguel Rivera's memory and the determination to prevent other families from experiencing Carmen Rivera's grief. The badge she wore was real, but her loyalty belonged to federal law enforcement and constitutional principles that transcended local institutional corruption. Her first day on patrol, she met her training officer, a 20-year veteran with kind eyes and patient demeanor, who reminded her that good officers still existed within corrupted systems. "Word of advice, rookie," he said as they began their shift. "This job will break your heart repeatedly if you let it. Too much evil. Too much pain. Too many people who can't be saved no matter how hard you try. So how do you keep going?" His smile was sad but genuine. "You save who you can, when you can, however you can. And you remember that every life protected, every right defended, every act of justice makes the world slightly better than it was before." As their patrol car pulled into Chicago traffic, Adira thought about Miguel Rivera tutoring elementary students after school, Detective Morrison choosing conscience over career, Carmen Rivera demanding justice despite institutional resistance, individual acts of courage that had exposed corruption and prevented other deaths, even though the broader fight continued. The radio crackled with dispatch calls. Domestic disturbances, traffic accidents, reports of suspicious activity in neighborhoods where police corruption enabled crime. Each call represented opportunity to help or harm, to protect constitutional rights or abuse police authority. Agent Adira Stone, embedded in another corrupted police department, prepared to continue the work Miguel Rivera had died for, holding law enforcement accountable to the communities they were sworn to protect. 6 months into her Chicago assignment, encrypted communication arrived from an unknown source. Detroit Police Department, similar pattern. 17 deaths. Federal informants, systematic targeting. How many cities before someone connects the dots? How many dead kids before federal response matches the scope of the conspiracy? The message included attachment files, surveillance photos, financial records, communications intercepts suggesting coordination between corrupt officers across multiple jurisdictions, evidence of organized criminal enterprise spanning cities, states, possibly entire regions. Adira forwarded the intelligence to Ace Agent Cross with assessment. Miguel Rivera case was local manifestation of national conspiracy. Federal response needs immediate expansion. The work would continue, broader and more dangerous than anyone had initially understood. But it would continue because people like Miguel Rivera deserve justice. Families like the Riveras deserve truth. And constitutional principles required protection from those who wore badges while betraying everything they represented. In a secure conference room at FBI headquarters, federal agents began planning Operation Blue Wall, a nationwide investigation into police corruption networks that had been systematically murdering federal informants while operating under color of law. The badge Miguel Rivera had trusted would finally be worthy of that trust. But that was a story for another day, when federal agents had gathered enough evidence to dismantle criminal conspiracies that reached higher and deeper than anyone wanted to believe.